All right, let's talk a little bit about taxes. So I think the best way is just to dive straight into this question. So it says if a $150 tax per unit is imposed in this market, then the effective price the buyer pays after equilibrium, blah, blah, blah. So the first thing to note is sometimes with these questions, it doesn't here, but sometimes it'll say like is imposed on the buyers or on the sellers. Oh, you can't see that, sorry. It's imposed on the buyers or on the sellers or whatever. It doesn't matter who it's imposed on. It doesn't affect the question at all. It's just there to throw you off. So just ignore that. So in this question, it says $150 tax per unit. So what does it mean to have a $150 tax? So we draw a tax wedge. So when I think of a wedge, I think of, I don't know, something that's wedging in between two things, causes them to separate, right? This is coming in, and it's the same thing. We want to wedge our tax in between the supply and the demand curve. So how do we know where to draw the line? So when it says $150 tax, that $150 is the length of the line. So I look, it's always going to be obvious to you if they're not going to try and trick you. Where is it obviously? I look where it intersects 2 points, and is the difference between these 2 points equal to 150? So right here, it's, I don't know, it's probably about 250. And right here, it's about 100. So would you look at that? 250 minus 100, this is 150. That's the length of the tax. So this is where our tax wedge is. Okay, so like we did in previous videos, before I add this, let me just step back. I should have done this first. At equilibrium, our equilibrium price is 150, okay? Because it's 150, we have our consumer surplus, which is right here, and we have our producer surplus, which is right here. Okay? But when we draw our, when we draw our tax wedge, the equilibrium quantity changes from 100 to 50. Okay. And as you can see, it creates this length of the tax, and it creates two new prices. One is the buyer price, one is the seller price. And it's not always distributed equally. In this case, for this question, it's not distributed equally, which is why I like it. So our equilibrium was right here. It was 150. So how do you know which one's the buyer price, which one's the seller price, first of all? So the buyer price, our buyers, well, let's see here. Let's deal with this point right here. This point is on the demand curve. And is the demand, does it deal with consumers or producers? The demand always deals with consumers. And are consumers buyers or sellers? Consumers are always buyers. So as such, this point right here is your buyer price. Okay, and it's a buyer price of $250. So that means normally when you went to the store, it was about $150 to buy, let's say it was a TV. But now with the tax, it's now when the buyer goes to the store, they purchase it for $250. So they're bearing $100 of the tax. So that means, what about this other point? This other point has to be the seller price. And vice versa, it's on the supply curve. Supply deals with producers, producers are sellers. So what does this mean? So because it's $100, let's say when Walmart sold their product, the TV, they normally got $150 in profit, or they sold it for $150, however you want to view it. And now they're only getting $100 in profit. So they're losing $50 to the tax. So in this case, buyers are bearing $100 of the tax, and sellers are bearing $50 of the tax, and combined it's $150. So who bears more of the tax burden? It's the buyers. And the way you know who bears more is based upon the elasticity, based upon the slopes of the curve. Okay, so we already answered the question here for this actual problem. It says the price that the buyers pay, which is $250. But let's keep going. So first off, let's break down each quadrant. So the price above the buyer price and below the demand curve. So below the demand curve and above the buyer price is always going to be our consumer surplus. Okay? And the area underneath the seller price but above the supply curve is always going to be our producer surplus. It seems obvious right now, but this is important to note, especially when we have perfectly inelastic and perfectly elastic graphs. Sometimes it's hard to see where the consumer and producer surplus is. Same with subsidies. So that's why I make the note of saying this is above the buyer price and below the demand curve. The remaining area is what we call the tax revenue. This is what the government is getting from the tax. And then we have obviously our little triangle here, which is our dead weight loss. Okay, this is lost transactions due to the increase in price, due to the tax. And so if we can ask you any one of these questions, and you can find the area, you can find what the buyer price is, can you find what the seller price is, can you find the consumer surplus, the deadweight loss, the tax revenue, and the producer surplus? If you can do that, you're in great shape. But this is taxes. So as always, let me know if you have any questions. Adam out.